Thank you, Tomas. I will probably be a little bit less than 20 minutes because I'm very scared of his bell that he has today. Good afternoon. I am pleased to be with you. The idea of bringing together representatives from different battlefields and museums around the world to think about remembrance and commemoration is a respectful way to honor the millions of innocent people who have perished in violence over time in Poland and all across the world. What you have there are two things. One is my increasingly balding head that you can see. The other, in the middle, is our museum and visitor center at Gettysburg. Very quickly, inside the red part, off to the right, is the cyclorama painting, which was done by French artists in the 1800s and is the largest painting in North America that commemorates the Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg is the site of the major battle in the history of North America, with more than 51,000 casualties over 3 days. The battle in Gettysburg happened quite accidentally. Marching armies stumbled onto each other and fought there because they converged on a town with many roads leading into it. In terms of scope, about 90,000 Union men from northern states, led by General Meade, defeated 75,000 Confederates from southern states, led by General Lee. Underlying this battle, and indeed the entire American Civil War, were issues related to states' rights and slavery of African Americans. To my Polish friends here today, one regiment fighting on the Union side to help set other people free was the 58th New York Volunteer Regiment, mostly immigrants from Poland living in New York City, sometimes called the Polish Legion. This regiment fought bravely at Gettysburg. The battle itself is easily explained. Union soldiers retreated through the town on day one, repulsed Confederate attacks on the high ground on day two, and held the center of the battle line against what is known as Pickett's Charge on day three, sending the defeated Confederates back to Virginia. Each year, we have an annual reenactment of Pickett's Charge, the third day of the battle, that thousands of people participate in. Gettysburg was the turning point of the American Civil War. Just to offer some perspective, the American Civil War had a total of about 620,000 casualties in the 1860s, which was about 2% of the total population at the time. Most soldiers during those times died of disease, not combat. Remarkably, at Gettysburg, in contrast to many battlefields, only one innocent civilian was killed during the fighting. A young woman shot accidentally while baking biscuits in her kitchen. There she is. That was the house she lived in. Gettysburg National Military Park sits on about 24 square kilometers of land. It has about 1,400 monuments to the soldiers who fought, and each year is visited by about 1 million people, about 3% of whom are international visitors. I'm president of the Gettysburg Foundation, which works in partnership with the National Park Service to preserve Gettysburg National Military Park and the National Historic Site at the Eisenhower Farm. Gettysburg is America's best preserved battlefield, and just like so many other battlefields discussed at this conference, is a place that transcends its historical era. An obvious way is that many Americans are descendants of the more than 160,000 soldiers who fought there. Current American families are woven by their ancestry into this historical narrative. And that merely scratches the surface. The Gettysburg battlefield honors the veterans of the Civil War, but by its sheer scope and significance, honors the veterans of all our wars. In Gettysburg is a stunning landscape open to all visitors to enjoy, a picturesque place that inspires painters and writers and sculptors. Our friends in the National Park Service even have a monthly artist in residence program where they will have a resident artist spend the month drawing lessons from the battlefield and then presenting their work. There are just a few pictures from Gettysburg, one from the museum, one that gives you a sense of the number of monuments, one, the fencing that runs for miles, and one of the cannons. We have over 400 cannons on the grounds, most of which were located there in their actual historic places by the veterans who came back and said where they fought after the Civil War. There's the Soldiers National Cemetery, which is another part of the whole Gettysburg battlefield. Gettysburg is a showplace for sustainable environmental practices. It is an ongoing experiment in biological diversity and restoration, with the replanting of native peach and apple orchards to return the battlefield to its original 1863 appearance. There are some more of the images of the battlefield. Let me go one more. And there's the orchards, and there are our artists in residence working on the battlefield now in contemporary times. Gettysburg is a teaching tool for visitors, including the agricultural practices, the architecture, and the medical treatments of the era. It provides insight into the habits and the living conditions of the people living then, including the understudied lives of women of the era. Three days of fighting at Gettysburg will always be the signature storyline. But we are working now to broaden the narrative to include more focus on after the battle, because for the last 155 years, Gettysburg has not been a place of conflict, but a place of healing and kindness, of remembrance and conciliation, of forgiveness and redemption. Remember, Gettysburg is a little bit different from some of the battles that we talk about today because it was a civil war. It was not fought with other nations. Here is one slice, just one slice of a remarkable story after the battle. Immediately after the battle, residents move out of the town of Gettysburg and offer food to the hungry, water to the thirsty, and help for the injured, much like the Good Samaritan in the New Testament. It does not mean everyone was kind, but much kindness was shown. Elizabeth Thorne, a woman who was 6 months pregnant, helps bury over 100 men at Gettysburg, which is why there is a monument to a pregnant woman at Gettysburg. Lydia Hamilton Smith, of African mother and Irish father, starts daily trips on a wagon into the countryside, explaining the destruction at Gettysburg and returning with donations for people in need. A tent hospital called Camp Letterman is hastily erected, where wounded of both armies are treated. Doctors and nurses stream in from neighboring towns to care for the wounded at this tent hospital. Convalescing Confederates recovering from their injuries will write letters home telling loved ones they are being just as well cared for as the Union soldiers. 5 months after the battle, President Abraham Lincoln arrives by train, and he stays at the home of local attorney David Wills, who invited him to Gettysburg to, quote, make a few appropriate remarks. This is the train station where Lincoln arrived. We have preserved that, and the Gettysburg Foundation owns that property. That is the David Wills house where Lincoln actually stayed the night before of the famous Gettysburg Address. That's the room he slept in. We have his original bed that he slept in that night. The Park Service owns that property. A few months after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln delivers the Gettysburg Address, the most famous speech by an American president. He offers both resolve and a spirit of healing, commemorating the sacrifice of soldiers while avoiding the temptation to be triumphant. In his remarks, Lincoln never talks about the Union victory at Gettysburg. He never maligns or criticizes the Confederate soldiers. In fact, he never mentions either side. There is a famous photo perched in the cemetery where he gave the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln speaks about nurturing democracy. He starts the Gettysburg Address out with the birth of the nation in 1776 in the spirit of equality found in the American Declaration of Independence. He ends the Gettysburg Address with the fervent hope that governments of, by, and for the people will not perish from this earth. He seeks what he calls a new birth of freedom in the nation for those who are not yet free. He blends humility, compassion, thoughtfulness, and resilience, which is why his speech endures. This same healing will continue for decades through veteran reunions. The 50th reunion in the year 1913 brings 50,000 soldiers. President Woodrow Wilson characterizes them as enemies no longer, but as generous friends, the quarrel forgotten. The high point of reconciliation comes when Confederates reenacting Pickett's charge, that final attack on the third day of the battle, dramatized in our massive cyclorama painting, when the Confederates are met with cheers and handshakes from the Union men who fought them, with what is described as brotherly love and affection. The picture on the upper left is the famous picture of the veterans who fought, shaking hands over the wall that they fought at. The 75th anniversary in 1938 brings dedication of the Eternal Light Peace Memorial by President Franklin Roosevelt, who speaks of divided loyalties now meeting in a united loyalty. There's the eternal peace light. The flame burns on the top of that all year around. The 100th anniversary of the Gettysburg battle brings Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who calls for racial reconciliation in America, mindful that the post-war reconciliation was mostly among the white veterans who fought, without attention to the slavery issue precipitating the conflict or the painfully slow progress on civil rights. The bottom line: Gettysburg is appropriately remembered as the great battlefield of North America, but its full meaning runs much deeper, with profound relevance for today. For long has it been a place exhibiting what President Lincoln so famously described as the better angels of our nature. So what steps are we taking to expand the understanding of Gettysburg to make it more relevant to each successive generation? We are renovating the nearby Spangler Farm, used as a field hospital after the battle, where soldiers of both armies were treated. We tell visitors the true stories of healing, medicine, and compassion at that site after the battle was over. We are thinking about new museum exhibits that look more generally and specifically at the role of women and African Americans before and after the battle, thus telling a more inclusive story. We've launched what we call a recruits program, a program that brings Gettysburg's lessons to younger audiences by interesting them in sustainability and battlefield preservation. We are partnering with the National Park Service in what we call Museum Mondays, running brief clips featuring one museum artifact, and then telling the human interest story that accompanies that specific artifact. Great Conversations at Gettysburg is our umbrella to have conversations on the premises about issues related to the Civil War, such as democracy, sustainability, civility, and reconciliation. We just participated in the Big History Project, engaging with teachers all around the globe with this more expansive understanding of Gettysburg. Finally, Gettysburg Revisited is the umbrella name of our foundation's efforts to bring the lessons of Gettysburg out to the American people, to improve the level of political civility in the United States. We've held 22 events in 11 of our 50 states so far, mostly at universities and service clubs. Our hope is that the spirit of conciliation that happened at Gettysburg after the battle will improve the nature of our public dialogue. In short, we are taking many deliberate steps to broaden understanding of the meaning of Gettysburg and to make it steadily relevant to the times in which we live, mindful of future generations. In closing, first, thank you for your attention. Second, the battles represented at this conference must always be remembered because they teach us so much about human nature, our sometimes inexplicable mixture of cruelty and compassion, determination and resignation, denial and acceptance. One goal of telling stories of human conflict is to commemorate sacrifice, to honor those who gave their lives for the safety and the freedom of others. Then beyond that, I would suggest to you that another goal of our battlefields must be to encourage peace. Only a month before the Civil War ended, Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated a second time as president. He could have talked about the Union victory in the war that was about to happen and end the war. Instead, he uttered these magnificent, restorative words. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. I hope this conference, in some small way, helps all of us who are custodians of bitter conflict how to best find that just and lasting peace of all nations. Thank you.